Hello, welcome to London, and today I am joined by none other than the great commentator Peter Drury. Hello Peter, how are you?
Sasha, I'm very good, thank you. I'm really glad to meet you, and thank you for coming so far to see me. I appreciate it.
We are glad to meet you as well. So how did you get into commentary? What was the calling for you?
Well, I don't know if it was a calling so much as a dream, really. Like so many other young people, I suppose I thought a lot about sport. I would love to have been a great sportsman, but not many people get to be a great sportsman, and I can assure you I was a long way from being great. So I guess the next best thing was to pursue a fascination I always had for television and radio sport as well, radio first actually. And even in pursuing that, and as a young child pretending to be a commentator, as many do, I didn't really believe that it would be something that I came to do professionally and full time. When I left university, where I studied politics, I started to become an accountant, but I was poor at that and I didn't enjoy it. And so I stopped and began to pursue a bit of a dream. That involved a lot of rejection. You know, you have to wait until somebody gives you a chance, and eventually I found a way into sports journalism, and eventually thereafter into radio, BBC Radio, and from there into television. So it was quite a long road, as it tends to be, but I've been very lucky to do as my work something that really has been also my pleasure.
So I'm sure you'd have had an idol while growing up, like the fascination of doing the commentary. So
yes.
Who was your idol?
Well, as a young boy and indeed into my teenage years, I used to, on a Saturday afternoon in England, go to my bedroom, lock the door and listen to the football on the radio. And the greatest of all the football commentators at that time was a man on the BBC called Peter Jones, who had a magnificent, strong voice and a great use of the language. He used it with such verve and such almost poetic cadence, and his description of football entranced me. I guess therefore he was probably my first broadcast hero, though I've been very lucky to get to know the generation before me, if you like, in terms of television commentators when I've come through, the likes of John Motson and Barry Davis and Martin Tyler and a man called Brian Moore, who sadly is now long dead, but who was a predecessor of mine at ITV, the company that I worked for in England for 14 or 15 years, and was a lovely gentleman and was a great influence on me as well.
So the next question will be pretty tough for you. Which football team do you support?
Well, I'm two different people when it comes to football, Sartek. I'm the person who does go and support a football team and pay my money with my family to watch them, and I'm the person who very often, more often, is at a game as a neutral. And so I prefer to keep them absolutely separate, because when I'm at a game supporting my team, I am, like every other football supporter, blind to all the opinions of others, partisan, one-eyed, and not always rational, you know. And so that is me then, which is me private, and me public doing my work is a very different individual. Even when I'm commentating on the team that I follow, I forget that I'm following them, because it's my job to concentrate, to retain neutrality, and simply to describe and articulate what's put in front of me. So I have no shame, and if somebody put a gun to my head, I would of course tell you who I supported, but I like to think that it's not relevant in this context.
So the next question is if you have preference of doing commentary in any other sport apart from football, what will be it?
It would certainly be cricket. I love the game of cricket. I still play the game of cricket very poorly. I wish I could be good, but I'm not. But I play at a very humble club level, and I follow the game closely in England and internationally, and I know in your country it is absolutely huge. Yeah, the biggest of all the games. It's a great game. I think actually any ambition, and it must be a frustration for young people who want to be a cricket commentator, any ambition I had would be unrealistic, because in this day and age it is commentated on almost exclusively by great former players. I know that's the case in India, and it's certainly the case in England as well. Because so many of them are so very articulate as well as having an ability to read the game. You know, I can watch cricket and enjoy it, but can I tell you which way the ball is going to spin based on how it's coming out of the hand? No, I can't. I'm not that good, you know, and the great cricketers of course can, and read the game in a way I couldn't possibly. So actually I'm very content that cricket remains a hobby of mine. I love to watch it on the television, I love to be a part of my club at home, and I love watching the great former players articulate the game for me.
So we'll take a short break now, friends, and when we come back we'll ask Peter more questions related to football. Hello and welcome back. Hello Peter, it is nice to have you again. So like, your commentary gives us goosebumps and inspires us a lot. So like, among all the matches you have commented so far, which one is your favorite?
I dread this question, Sasa. I dread this question because I've been so lucky. I've seen so many great football matches. I suppose, if I'm honest, they've not necessarily been the greatest matches, but the greatest thrill in the world is to commentate on the World Cup final, you know, and I've done that twice now, and they were both unforgettable experiences. One was in the Maracanã in Rio, which is a sort of cathedral to football, and just to be there is a privilege in itself, and to see the World Cup final there was magnificent. And then this year in Moscow, it was a very exciting World Cup final, full of goals and great moments between France and Croatia. So those have to be career highlights, because to be asked to do that is in itself a thrill. But you know, in the many years that I've been covering football, I've seen many exciting games. The Aguero game, when Manchester City became champions for the first time, that obviously was an extraordinary moment. And I enjoy also the very smallest games, you know, the early rounds of the FA Cup, where there are small amateur teams involved, and people are playing the game for the love of it, with all the glory and the money and all of that way out of the way. I love meeting real people. So every game has its own narrative, its own reason for being, and there's no game that doesn't excite me.
Okay, so the next question is, tell us about your fascination of words, because we all remember the Manolas moment from the Barcelona game.
Yes.
And it was like quite famous all over on YouTube, all across the world. So
Yes.
how did that moment occur? Like, I'm sure you couldn't have scripted it, because it often happened instantly, but
Yes.
what was that fascination with words?
Well, it is just a fascination with words, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And so it's not false modesty to say I was very lucky that night that it all just came together. You know, those words poured out of my mouth. And people seem to like them. You know, that's all. I can't say any more than that, really, because as I was saying, excuse me, as I was saying that, I wasn't thinking, wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I really wasn't. I was caught up in the moment, and those are the words that came out. And it was very gratifying afterwards, because I don't do social media, I'm not on Twitter or any of those things, and I was only told by friends, you know, this thing has gone wild, and I had no idea that it would. I had no expectation that it would. You're absolutely right, I couldn't possibly have scripted it, because how was I to know that that was going to happen? You know, you can't be ready for those moments. And what I would say to you is this as well. People have said, that was my goal. That was my goal. It wasn't my goal. It was Manolas who scored that goal. I just happened to be lucky to be sitting in that ground on that night with a microphone in my hand when he scored that goal. Commentators are only as good as the action that is put in front of them. So if I commentate on a really boring 0-0 draw, nobody says anything to me. I get nothing from it. And I might think, I've done quite well today to sustain some interest in a game that really wasn't very interesting. But nobody says anything. If I commentate on a great moment like that between Roma and Barcelona, people come up and slap me on the back and say, whoa, whoa, fantastic. Well, why? I didn't do it. They did it. They did it. So if some good words happen to come pouring out of my mouth in that moment, well, I'm lucky. It just happened. Yeah.
Okay, so I will give you 2 matches basically. Now, suppose, and you have to select which match you would preferably choose to do the commentary.
We'll try.
And it will be very difficult.
Yes.
First one is England taking on Brazil in the World Cup final.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is an amateur club taking on a top professional club in the FA Cup final.
Well, I would pick England-Brazil in the World Cup final because I don't think there'd be anything bigger than that. I take your point, an amateur club against a professional club in the FA Cup final, fantastic. I mean, what a great story that would be. But listen, England won the World Cup in 1966. I was born in 1967. So I was that close to being able to say I was alive when England won the World Cup. The thought that I could be there and even commentating on a day England were in the World Cup final is so exciting, that prospect. And of course this year it nearly happened. Really I don't have to think very hard about that one. England against Brazil in the World Cup final would be, of course, the ultimate. Yeah.
And before we go on to the last question, one penultimate question is what advice will you give to the youngsters who want to become a commentator in the sports industry?
I would say this. First of all, be yourself. Be yourself. There's no point pretending, trying to be someone who you're not. So if you're going to be good at it, you're going to be good at it. Basically, the ingredients will be there. But you can't just lean on those ingredients. If you have a reasonable voice and you have a reasonable vocabulary, you're still going to have to work very hard at all the preparation, at learning the nuances of the broadcasting trade, at homework, hours and hours of it. But remember, the match is the culmination of many hours' work in preparation for the match. So taking all of that into account, I would say believe in yourself. If you really want it enough and keep cracking away at it, it will arrive eventually, sooner or later. But you've got to be persistent. You've got to understand that people are going to reject you along the way, that not everybody is going to love what you do, and so you've got to be a little bit thick-skinned, but believe in yourself with humility. So understand you never stop learning, and indeed you will sometimes get things wrong. There will be bad days, but there are a lot of lovely days. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Peter. It was very nice catching up with you. And friends, here we finish the interview with the legendary Peter Drury.
Very nice to meet you, Sasa.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.